Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Cape Falcon Kayak, and welcome to another video in our small boat camping series where I show you how to camp efficiently out of skin-on-frame kayaks and canoes. Although honestly, this information is going to be useful for anyone who's interested in learning how to pack lighter and faster and go camping without sacrificing too much comfort. So first up here, if you haven't watched the first video in this series, make sure you go back and do that now, because that's where I give you a general overview of all the specific items that you're going to see in these later videos. And we pack all of that into one of my skin-on-frame sea kayaks so you can see how this whole thing ultimately comes together. Also, if you find this series useful, all I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe button, consider building one of our skin-on-frame boats, or buying your next piece of paddling gear from us. So, what we're going to be doing here today is talking about bags, because man, there are a lot of bags involved anytime you're thinking about camping out of a small boat. We're going to talk about the bags that I use to organize all of my smaller bags when I'm getting ready to go out camping. We're going to talk about the bags that I actually put my camping gear inside of. We're going to talk about any smaller bags that might go inside of those bags. We're going to talk about the bags that we put the gear bags into when we actually put them inside of the kayak. We're going to talk about an optional bag that you might put your entire body into so you can get inside the kayak. I'm going to talk about a completely different bag that I usually put in the cockpit in front of me. And finally, we're going to talk about the myriad of fine options that are available if you're interested in camping out of a canoe instead of a kayak. Also, beyond the function of all these bags, the other thing to pay attention to is the size and the quantity of bags. Because the best way to keep yourself from showing up at the put-in with more stuff than you can actually fit in your kayak or canoe is not to bring more bags than will actually fit in your boat. Basically, whenever I'm getting set up to go camping, before I even leave my house, I make sure that I've got everything packed into two different bags. One is an Ikea bag that has all of my paddling gear. This one also has my ditch bag in it. And the other one is an Ikea bag that has everything I need to go camping. And the reason I do it this way is because these Ikea bags are a perfect representation of exactly how much stuff I can easily fit into one of my skin-on-frame kayaks. However, even if I'm not camping out of a skin-on-frame kayak, let's say I'm camping out of a fiberglass kayak that has a lot more space inside, or I'm camping out of a canoe, I still try to fit all of my camping gear for the week into one of these bags, because that means that I'm not overpacking. That means my boat's not going to be too heavy, which affects the maneuverability. It makes the boat more sluggish, which means that it's going to be harder to push, you're going to be more tired, and your trip isn't going to be as enjoyable. So the foundation of my packing strategy is always going to be 5 or 6 of these 13-liter lightweight Sea to Summit dry bags. And yours don't have to be exactly this brand, but you're looking for a lightweight dry bag for any of the dry bags that you're going to be putting in your bigger dry bags that are going to end up in the ends of your boats. The reason you don't want to go with a heavy PVC bag like my ditch bag right here, it's just because it ends up kind of taking up a lot of space and it's hard to pack, and it's just an unnecessary amount of redundancy. Now, just to give you an idea of what's in here, I've always got one bag with clothes and usually a few of my personal items. I've got another bag that has my sleeping bag in it, usually a 600 fill down mummy bag. If I'm going out for a week, I've got 2 of these that have my food inside of them. And then also, I've got another one that has my camp stove, fuel, knives, forks, a little cutting board. Basically, my whole camp kitchen goes into the last one. And then in addition to these bags, I've often got a handful of 1 gallon and then 1 liter Ziploc bags as well. And these are something that I would use to pack my food into, just to keep it a little more organized. Or I might be putting my medications, my first aid supplies, or any personal effects that could benefit from a little bit more organization and visibility and an extra layer of waterproofing, especially if this is going to go into my ditch bag, which doesn't have another layer around it. Now, just a quick word about packing any dry bag that you're going to be taking out on the water. Unlike backpacking, you don't want to try to compress this and push all the air out of it, because if you do that, and this does end up in a situation where it's submerged, it's going to try to expand, which is going to suck water in through any pinholes or if you didn't close it exactly right. So when we're camping to go out on the water, you always want to leave your bags fluffy with a little bit of air. That way, if the worst happens and water does get to these, the pressure of the water is going to force air bubbles out of it instead of sucking water into it. Also, I'm sure most people watching this know this already, anytime you've got a dry bag, whether it's a heavy duty one or a lightweight one like this, you want to make sure you're rolling it carefully. 1, 2, minimum of 3 times, and if you can get 4, that's even better. Now, taking a look at my ditch bag really quick, what this is a bag that either sits in front of me, usually clipped off to the side in my canoe, or it sits in between my legs in the cockpit if I'm kayaking. And the purpose of this bag is that it has anything that I want access to during the day on the water, and also anything I would want access to in an emergency situation where if I had to abandon the boat, I could still survive, maybe not comfortably, but I could survive for a couple days and I could get myself to safety. And so I'm going to cover all the contents of this in a separate video. I just wanted to point out that this is not a lightweight dry bag. This is actually a heavy duty PVC coated dry bag. And as far as exactly the right size for this, I have both a 10 liter and a 15 liter. I really like the size of the 10 liter here, but I feel like the 15 liter actually holds all the things that I want inside of it a little better. Now, this is a big change from the last version of this course that I released, because I used to recommend this bag right here. This is the Watershed Chattooga bag, and honestly, this is the single best dry bag you can buy on the market. I mean, the fabric on this is just balmer. This is what the Navy SEALs use in their operations, and it is, of all the options I'm going to show you here today, the most waterproof option. So if I open this up, you can see it's got this giant Ziploc zipper here, and there is no way that water is getting inside of this bag. It's actually really hard to open. It's actually somewhat challenging to close sometimes as well. And honestly, that's the reason that I don't use it anymore, because even though this is what you would want if you're, say, bringing $3,000 camera out on the water, just the cumbersomeness of opening my spray skirt and then opening all these buckles and then opening this up and trying to get what I need to and sealing it back up, it just ended up being too much of a hassle. The other problem I had with this bag is that at 22 liters, it just ended up being a little bit too big. Now, just a quick honorable mention of some things that aren't inside of dry bags. You can see here, I've got my tent, and yeah, it's not going to be the funnest thing if your tent ends up soaked in water, but this tent is going inside a separate larger bag, so it's unlikely that water is going to get to it. And if your tent gets wet, it's not like your sleeping bag being wet. You're just going to be annoyed. You're not going to be, at risk of dying of hypothermia. So I usually don't double bag my tent. And I also usually don't double bag my sleeping mat, because if the sleeping mat gets wet, blow it up, hit it a couple times, you're going to have enough water off of it that you can lay out your sleeping bag and not have a problem. All right, so next up here, we're going to talk about the bigger bags that we pack all those small bags into so we can slide them into the ends of a skin-on frame sea kayak. And this is a subject that's been a little bit frustrating lately. Way back in the day, we used to have a great option that was really cheap that was a double chamber bag. Basically, it had a separate gear chamber and a separate air chamber for redundancy, but then those bags went extinct and you couldn't get them for a while. And then about 5 years ago, I convinced a friend of mine to start a little company making that same type of bag, but he just wasn't able to do it in the long term in a way that was cost effective. So these days we have less options, but the options that we have still work. So why don't we come in a little closer and I'll show you how these are set up. All right, so taking a look at our current options for float bags, both of the bags here that you see, the one on top and the one on the bottom, are made by the folding kayak company Track Kayaks. You can buy them on their website. And both of these are single chamber bags that can be used as float bags, but also you can put camping gear in them as well. Now, in the past, we did have some options for dual chamber bags, which were really nice because that gives you an extra level of safety with the air chamber completely sealed. Unfortunately, those bags don't exist anymore, so this is what we have to choose from. Now, starting out with the bag on top here, this is their 40-liter Expedition grade bag. And the nice thing about this bag is that it is extremely tough. It has this super heavy-duty fabric here, and it also has a really robust watertight zip closure at the top. I didn't used to trust this zipper, but over time I've learned that these are actually pretty durable and you can trust them in the long term to not leak and let water into your camping gear. Now, other nice thing about this bag is it has a really long stem, so you can inflate it from the cockpit. It's amazing how many float bag companies have overlooked that over the years. It's also got a couple tie-down points on either side here, and you've got a couple more tie-down points out here, and you got a little grommet at the end. So if you had a pulley system in your kayak, which I personally don't recommend, you could potentially pull this into the end of the boat a little bit further. So overall, this is a really nice bag, but the only problem with it is that it's a little bit small. I mean, when you're talking about flotation in a skin-on frame kayak, more is always better. And I would love it if they would make this same float bag, but in the 60-liter size that I'm about to show you sitting here below it. Unfortunately, they don't do that, so this is what we have right now. And I have found that as long as I'm packing carefully, I really don't have many problems packing these bags, two of these, one for the bow and one for the stern, with enough gear to be able to camp comfortably for a week-long camping trip without having to get into super ultralight camping gear. Now, as far as its flotation capacity, I feel like as a float bag, this is really appropriate for our smaller size kayaks, which would be the F1 up to 125 pounds, the LPB up to 160 pounds, and the Greenland kayak of almost any size. But when you get into the bigger boats, the medium size F1s, the larger size F1s, the larger size LPBs, I would really like to see a little more flotation in the boat than this, which is where this bag underneath is going to start to be a little more useful. However, that doesn't mean that I would never use this smaller bag in some of my larger kayaks. It really depends on the situation. So for example, let's say I'm going on a long expedition in a remote area where having a failure in one of these bags could lead to a pretty bad situation as far as, leaking water into your stuff or potentially waterlogging your boat and you're not being able to do an effective rescue. In that case, I might be willing to live with the lower volume of this bag and the less flotation just to have the extra reliability of it. So anyways, go ahead and set this aside. And the other bag that Track has is this 60-liter bag right here. Now, that other bag there was I think, PVC coated polyester. This bag is urethane coated nylon. It's a lot lighter weight, but it's also a lot bigger. So starting out with the advantages of this bag, the size is almost perfect for our boats. If you roll this down and seal it up nice and tight and inflate it, this fills up the ends of our medium and larger size kayaks really well, and that keeps more water out. So if you end up in a rescue situation, it's just going to make that process a lot easier. Also, the extra volume for camping gear is really nice in this. It's easier to pack this larger bag, and if you pair that with one of our medium-sized or larger kayaks, you can carry more stuff, or you just don't have to work as hard to get that stuff into the ends of the boats. Now, getting into the downsides of this particular bag, this is thin material here, and I have had some issues with the seams splitting along the edges. If you overstuff this, if you're not just ramming gear into the ends, that doesn't tend to happen. But if you try to force stuff into here, it can start to peel apart these seams along the edges here. The good news is that you can just glue those back together with Aqua Seal and then the bag is going to be fine. Another thing that can happen is if you inflate this with air and you forget that it's inflated with air and you leave it on top of your car out in the sun, sometimes it can actually, the air pressure can split these seams along the side. Now, keep in mind, this is an older version of this bag. It's possible the company has solved that issue and we don't have those seam splitting issues anymore. That was just my experience in the past, in the first generation of these bags. Now, the other thing about these bags is instead of having a zip closure, they have a roll closure along the top. So you can see inside here, this is the gear bag, this is the air chamber. It's all the same chamber. So the only thing keeping the water out is this roll closure. And roll closures can be reliable, but they have to be rolled up perfectly. If you're lazy about rolling this up, you're not going to get a good seal. So if you end up getting these bags, just make sure that when you roll them, it's nice and flat, and you're going to roll these over. I would go 5 times, honestly. And then you can clip this together. And that is going to be a pretty good watertight and airtight seal. So this bag, advantages of it, it's a lot bigger, it's a lot easier to pack. It's also a lot less expensive. A couple of those bags I just showed you are going to set you back $225 for the pair. I think this is $100 less. And so for me personally, if I was just doing casual weekend trips and I wasn't paddling in ice cold water or on some type of a rugged expedition to a remote location, I would probably choose these because they're less expensive, they're easier to deal with, they're lighter weight. But if you're in a situation where durability is absolutely important, and if you were to have any water ingress into your float bags, you could end up in a life-threatening situation, you probably want to go with the other style, even though it doesn't have as much flotation space. So hopefully this helps you to understand the pros and the cons of the different float bag options. Next thing we're going to talk about here is sea socks. So coming over to the actual kayak here, how this works is we've got a big hollow fabric or neoprene tube that has an opening on one end, and that opening is going to be measured to be the same circumference as the perimeter of the combing that it's designed to fit on. And this one happens to be made by reed spray skirts, so it has an elastic band that's captured inside of a sticky neoprene perimeter. And how this works is you work that perimeter over the lip of the combing. Now, just a quick tip when you're stretching this onto your combing, you don't want to just stretch it over like that, call it good, and put your spray skirt on top of it, because that elastic band that's sewn into the perimeter here is sitting up against the bottom of the combing lip, and that means when you put your spray skirt around, it's not going to be grabbing full depth and really connecting well to the combing. So instead, the way you want to do this is take your time to make sure you work the sea sock all the way down like this. So when you run your fingers around, your fingers are on top of the elastic band, and your spray skirt band can reach all the way into the combing lip to make sure that you've got a good connection. And that's also going to help to keep this sea sock from accidentally coming off if you do a wet exit. And what this is going to give you is a place that you can sit inside of your kayak. But if for some reason you capsize and you fall out of the boat, instead of the whole boat flooding with water, only the sea sock is going to flood with water. And you can even just pull the sea sock out to get the water out of it, or you can just climb back in and then you can pump the water out as per normal, although it's a little trickier because sometimes the pump likes to suck up the bottom of the sea sock. So at least in theory, this seems like a great thing to have on your boat. But if you're thinking about getting a sea sock, there's a couple of things you need to know. The first one is that if this is not perfectly fitted, it is more dangerous than having nothing at all. Because if you are biasing your paddling judgments towards heading out somewhere where you absolutely may need to do a self-rescue to survive, and then your sea sock comes off and you can't do that self-rescue, well, you've just put yourself in a more dangerous situation. Also, for a sea sock to be effective, it has to fit perfectly. So see how I'm grabbing onto the sea sock right here and yanking on it? I mean, if I really pull on this, I can pull it off the lip, but it shouldn't be easy to pull off, because if this accidentally comes off while you're taking your spray skirt off, let's say you capsized and you don't know how to roll, well, then we're back to that situation where you flooded your kayak and then you're out of options for self-rescue. So if you're going to get a sea kayak, You got to make sure that it is perfectly fitted to your combing. Fortunately, we can help you with that because we have sea socks for all of our standard size combings. Sometimes we have them in stock, sometimes it's a special order, but we can definitely get you one of these that's perfect for your boat. And then the other thing you need to know is that sea socks do somewhat reduce your connection to the boat. You're not going to be quite as solid on your foot bags, and you're not going to be quite as solid on your knee braces. Also, they can feel kind of hot and claustrophobic and uncomfortable. So my recommendation is, if you are going into a situation where you might need to do a self-rescue in a fully loaded boat, let's say you're out touring solo, maybe in cold water, in that case, you really do need to have a sea sock to be safe. But if you're not in that situation, let's say you're just touring with friends and those friends know how to do skin-on frame group rescues, in that case, I would probably skip the sea sock and just go with my normal float bags. But the most important thing, if you're thinking about getting a sea sock, is to take the time to practice the rescues that you think you might need to do with this, which means loading the boat down with all of your camping gear and then heading out in a controlled way into similar conditions that you might find yourself in, and make sure that you actually can do those self-rescues so you don't get a false sense of security from having one of these in your boat. All right, so that's pretty much everything we need to pack our gear and ourselves into any kayak without bulkheads. But what if you're not packing a skin-on frame kayak? Let's say, for example, you're packing a sit-on-top kayak, or you're packing a skin-on frame canoe, or really any type of canoe. In that case, you've got a lot of different options for the big bags that all the little bags go into. And so what I've done here is I've laid out a whole bunch of different bags that I've used extensively over the years in different circumstances. And I'm going to talk about what I like and why I like it. And I'm also going to show you some options that didn't end up working out for me. That way you don't make the same mistakes that I did. All right, so let's start out here by talking about what hasn't worked well for me. And specifically, I'm talking about these mid-weight Sea to Summit larger dry bags. These are definitely a lot thicker than the thinner Sea to Summit dry bags that I showed you earlier that I put inside. But in my experience, after the first year of owning these, they start to leak. And so if you end up capsizing your boat, or for whatever reason, these end up submerged in water for an extended period of time, they do tend to suck in quite a bit of water. And then you're just relying on that second layer of protection on the inside. So even though these are tempting because they're a little bit cheaper and they're a lot lighter, I just don't feel like they're a good value as far as a primary first layer of protection outer bag that you're going to put your other stuff inside of. Now, what I do suggest is the NRS Outfitter bags. And these have been kind of the staple of river running bags for literally decades now. All the ones that I have are literally decades old. I've got a couple that are starting to leak, but these are the closest thing to an indestructible bag that you're going to get. They are thicker, they are coated in PVC, but you can count on these not to leak. Or in a worst case scenario, let's say this gets washed through a rapid or something by itself, it's only going to get a little bit of water inside of it as long as you close it up correctly. Now, as far as the size you're looking for, it really depends on the application. So as far as the packing quantity, like what these will fit, if you get the 107 liter, I believe it is, I think it's 3.8 cubic feet, that's a big bag that should hold the entire camping kit that I just showed you. And the times that I've used those is when I'm camping out of sit-on-top inflatable kayaks, where I actually take out the seat and just put the bag directly behind me, so my back is pushing against the back of this bag here, and then I've got all my gear in one big bag. Now, on the other hand, if you're packing a canoe where it's helpful to split your load to be able to manage your trim and also to have separate bags if you have to do long portages, in that case, you might want to go with something smaller like this bag right here. This one is the 62 liter bag. And if you're an ultralight camper, you can actually get everything you need for a week just inside of this bag. Or if you're a medium weight camper, you could use a bag like this, and you could use one of these 30 liter bags right here, Or if you're an ultralight camper that wants to split your load, you could just use 2 of the 30-liter bags. So it just really depends on your particular packing situation. Something I do want to mention, however, is if you're looking to portage, that's where a big dry bag with backpack straps attached to it starts to make a lot of sense, because you can put this on your back, obviously, you can put the canoe on your head, and then you can walk with both things at once. However, there's a caveat here, and that is I have never seen a dry bag with backpack straps attached that doesn't start to leak over time because of all the stress of the attachment points on the bag itself. And so whether that's actually a problem for you or not just depends on how hardcore what you're doing is. If you're doing whitewater canoeing, where you're just going to be constantly wet and you're going to be portaging, in that case, I would actually go with one of the NRS Outfitter bags and get a separate enclosure that you can put backpack straps on. That way you're not compromising the integrity of the bag. However, if I was doing moving river stuff where we might occasionally get some splashes in water, in that case, I think something like this that's integrated would be just fine. So, one final option, which you have seen already, is that if you are camping in a pack canoe, which is a really low volume canoe that you sit in like a kayak and paddle with a kayak paddle, and you already have a set of these bags right here because you're also camping out of a skin-on-frame kayak, these actually work really well in the end of pack canoes as well. Basically, you can just put this on the floor of the pack canoe, one in the bow, one in the stern. You can tie them down with some lacing or some cam straps, and it basically works exactly the same way as it does in a kayak. And the cool thing about these is you can use this stem here to give it additional flotation and puff it up, and then it's a 2-for-1. You've got flotation for your pack canoe, and you've got space for your gear, and it's even easier to unpack than a kayak because it's just open and you can grab it out of there. All right, so I think that's pretty much it here for our video talking about bags. I know this was not the most exciting video, but it is important information and it sets the stage for all the more interesting stuff that we're going to be covering in the upcoming videos. So hopefully you learned something, and like I said in the beginning, if you're an experienced kayak or canoe camper and you have your own suggestions, please leave those in the comments below, because even though I have a lot of knowledge, there's always more stuff to learn, and it would be great if the comment section of these videos could also end up being a resource for people who are just getting into this kind of camping. So as usual, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also, make sure you check out our website, capefalconkayaks.com, where we have skin-on-frame building video courses, plan sets, and various free skin-on-frame resources. You can also find us on Instagram, @CapeFalconBuilds, where we post photos and videos of whatever we're working on in the shop or whatever we're testing out on the water. And you can find that same content on the Cape Falcon Kayak Facebook page as well. So that's it for now. Take care. Be safe on the water. I will see you next time.